Welcome. You're on the Fringe show. I'm your host, Tatiana Zalan, and I go live on Fridays at 2 p.m. Dubai time. The Fringe is about our future, the future of art, technology, and society. I help you to navigate this rapidly changing world and uncertain future so that you can take advantage of the opportunities that are unfold in this new digital world that we live today. It's my episode number 70, and I decided to dedicate it to kind of a new offshoot in what I'm going to talk more regularly about from now on. And that's dedicated to some secrets of the digital art world. This is exactly the topic that I'm going to discuss today. What are the secrets of the digital art world? And we're starting with secret number one, 2 commandments for digital artists. So if you're a digital artist, this is the show for you. I already talked a lot about some aspects of digital art, like NFTs, art, digital art, computer-generated art, algorithms, and so on and so forth. I do talk about generative art sometimes. But today we're starting with 2 most fundamental principles for digital artists. If you want to succeed in this brave new world, this is your starting point. And of course, there are many, many aspects to cover, and I won't be able to go into a lot of detail today about certain aspects, like, for example, branding. But the most basic one is really the idea that the art world is changing as we speak, and what it means for you, what as an artist, particularly digital artist. The usual disclaimer before we go along, the views that I hear on you will listen on the show are my own. They do not represent the views of organizations or employers, for that matter, that I'm associated with. The Fringe show is for educational purposes only, and for information, of course, as well. What I'll start saying is that how the world of art and artists have changed. What are the, to use a fancy term, paradigms that we went through in this world? Bear with me, because I think we can't understand what's happening right now and what will happen in future unless we know a little bit of a history and how the role of the artist has changed over the years. Most of what I'm going to talk about comes from a brilliant book by, so actually one of the best books that I've read about art. You can disagree with it or agree with it, it's up to you, but it's great. And I certainly recommend it to you if you're an artist, a curator, or generally a person who is in this art world space. It's called The Death of the Artist by William Dereshevich, and this is where he goes into these several paradigms that the artistic world has been through, and focusing on right now what artists are supposed to do today because of these changes. And he starts with Renaissance, when artists were considered artisans and served apprenticeships, just like craftsmen would do. They worked at the request of other people or orders from other people, and they did what they were paid for and supported to do. So patronage was very common. It was not a gift. It was the status of things. And then the Renaissance came in the 15th and 16th century in Europe, and it began to modify the traditional pattern, but it didn't fundamentally alter it. Art ceased to be exclusively religious, but it was still very much imitative, and it tried to revive the great traditions of antiquity. But even at that time, creativity was still regarded as a power that belonged exclusively to the divine. Artists glorified God, or sometimes they flattened the noblemen or wealthy merchants who were paying them. Artists did not engage in any sort of social critique. It wouldn't have even occurred to them to do so. They spoke, and if somebody spoke about injustice at that time, or telling people, wake up, generally awaken society's consciousness, they were typically religious figures, not artists. They were visionaries, heretics, reformers, prophets. And then the second paradigm, so that was the first paradigm. during the Renaissance. And then the second one came very slowly at first in the 17th century, and then quite fast in the 18th century. Well, so what was new about the second new paradigm? It was when the arts really distanced themselves from the crafts and the artist from the artisan. So the term fine arts was the period when we heard it for the first time, first recorded in something like 1767 or about that time. And for the first time, the idea of creativity began to be associated with human activity, not with the activity of the divine, the God, specifically with art. And imitation gave away as an arts defining concept to expression. So expression replaced imitation. The new paradigm emerged first in full swing during the Romantic era, that was the late 18th and early 19th century, the period of Goethe and Beethoven and Wordsworth, and it reached its height a century later in the age of modernism. That was the period of Picasso, of Nijinsky, and of Proust. These developments, of course, did not take place in a vacuum. The emergence of art and the artists were components of the whole transformation of society that we call now modernity. With modernity came the intellectual, on another new type, not just a thinker, but a thinker with a social mission. The modern person emerged who was empowered, individual, and free, and the old structures, mental and social, were broken down. Now you had the chance, you as an individual, you had the chance, and therefore the duty to make your own life. You searched for values, you struggled to develop your own beliefs. You were not relying on prophets, on religious leaders anymore, and you worked your way towards your own mental independence. There was another feature of modernity that was really inseparable from the emergence of art, and that's the economic system of capitalism, which had by then become a fully fledged, although not yet global economic system. And just as a reminder, capitalism emerged following the 30-year war in Europe, and that ended in 1648. So the world where everything was valued by its price and judged by its utility, that was the brave new world, the world of capitalism, where everything, in short, was a commodity. The concept of art then shifted. Art was priceless, right? And in the best sense, useless because of that. And this idea was captured in the slogan back then, art for art's sake. Artists were considered to be above money, and yet they lived in this world which was dominated by the new class, the bourgeoisie. They were materialistic, they were indifferent to art, they called themselves Philistines. The art was evolving to another class, the antagonist, and the opposite of the bourgeoisie. And that's the bohemian art, or the bohemian, the artist is the bohemian. But capitalism also, interestingly enough, did enable art to emerge in the first place. Art could free itself finally from any sort of ideological control. It could speak its own meaning, has its own conceptual underpinning, because artists were now free to express themselves and free from economic control. Bohemians, by nature, were rebels. Just recall the Impressionists and the public's reaction to the very first exhibition of Impressionists. It was a spit in the face of classical academic canons as we know them. They could let go of this patronage and start through their work, sell it directly to the public. And that meant in practice that they were selling to the rising middle class, the progressive educated audience. And this word, the bohemian, appeared in English in 1848. The second paradigm was underpinned by a set of new ideas and attitudes. Art as high truth, art as a sacred calling, as genius, originality, bohemian authenticity. And interestingly enough, these ideas still continue to influence art to this day, even sometimes, we would say, in a muted form. And then a new paradigm came. This paradigm began to emerge, take shape after Second World War. That was an era of unprecedented optimism, the culture boom. We built museums, we built theaters, concert halls, and founded orchestras, opera companies, ballet troupes, all of that in unprecedented numbers. An entire bureaucratic apparatus arose to support the creation of art. We saw the emergence of foundations, residences, organizations, councils, trade unions, you have it. 1945, 47, this was when the post-war prosperity was also raising up the world's first mass middle class with leisure time, disposable income, and aspiration towards improvement. So these 30 years, 45 to 75, were really quite fundamental for the development of at least, well, in the West, of the middle class, and the artist as well. Art became a public good. Arts education diffused into schools. We had music, creative writing, arts and crafts classes, and so on. What does it mean? Well, what it means is that art became an institution, and the artist became the product of this institution. In other words, he or she became a professional. Now, you didn't need to go to Paris if you want to produce your masterpiece and then wait for the world to come to you, to catch up with you. Just like a doctor or a lawyer, you went to a university. You didn't want, or maybe you wanted to, but you couldn't become a celebrity all of a sudden by a single establishing work. You slowly but surely climbed the corporate, so to speak, ladder. You accumulated credentials, you sat on the boards and committees, you collected your prizes, your grants, your residences, you built your CV, just like any other professional. The culture industry was booming too. Record labels, radio stations, publishing houses, magazines and galleries and theaters. Artists formed unions, professional associations. They had conferences, gave each other prizes. And this institutionalization of art wasn't an isolated phenomenon. Across all society, a general professionalization was taking hold. Intellectuals were becoming professionals, just like scientists and businessmen and athletes and journalists. The middle class of artists has emerged by that time. It lived middle-class lives with middle-class status, middle-class salaries, and middle-class values. Art became well-behaved. Revolutionary streak and rhetoric was gone. Art, as the cultural bureaucrats like to explain to us back then, was meant to educate us, to enlighten us, to challenge the status quo, but, and this is a very important but, within the confines of the established framework of liberal democracy and its values, and by and large consensus values. So what we're seeing really is over these years, and why it's important to understand the history, is that in the past, there were these three paradigms for the artist, three systems of economic support: the artisan, the bohemian, and then the professional. And each entailed their own institutions, forms of training, types of audiences, modes of exhibition, modes of publication, of selling to collectors. So its own understanding of art and its role within society. And now we're undergoing the next transition. A fourth paradigm is emerging. The professional model that is typically associated with the artist as a professional and the middle class status of the artist, this model is on the decline, and the institutions that underpin it, profit and not-for-profit, either contract or disappear. So what's the essence of this paradigm? The essence is that there's nothing that's left there to shield you as an artist from the market. Competition is harder. Yes, there are many opportunities that we talk about, and the internet has given us a lot more opportunities, of course, the social networks, but there are also many more creatives that are competing with you. And artists are being increasingly asked to work for nothing or for very little or for exposure, so-called, which is really an euphemism for nothing, right? Young artists are particularly vulnerable to this kind of exploitation. The internet has changed the market too. And one of the biggest trends there has been the demonetization of creative content. It's a very important trend, the topic, and I'll probably talk about it in a separate show. The internet has also accelerated the traditional pace of artistic production. Across all these three paradigms, artists typically wanted and needed to take their time, to work without interruption, to cultivate a stillness, to focus, to sort of forget themselves in the creative process, to get into the flow, to give themselves as long as it took to discover their artistic voice and refine their vision. This is no longer possible. The internet no longer really makes it possible. Artists now are one-man bands. They manage their own career, and it's really like running a small business. The very notion of time has changed. It's an environment of instantaneity, of here and now, where virality is everything. Virality is king. So complexity, subtlety, all that is out. And it's the brief, the loud, the simple that are in. The artist is a producer. The artist has become a creative entrepreneur. And that has been a major shift, and that has its own implications. So what are the two commandments in this brave new world that we are now as artists? Two things. Two things are paramount if you want to succeed. First, your personal brand, and second, your fan base. So you are the artist Inc., and the brand called you. Austin Kleon, who is the author of Still Like an Artist and Show Your Work, another couple of books that are very interesting, very short too. You can go through them very quickly. And he put this matter like something like that. Being an artist and being a salesman, they are at odds with each other. Once you start doing the selling, when you sit down to actually make the work, there's some little bit of you that thinks about selling. Marketing wraps around your brainstem. You start thinking in terms of calls to action, and you know what's the value proposition. Still, he concluded that every artist is doomed to his time. You've got to work with what you've got, right? And I totally agree with him, because we, as an individual artist, you can't change the world. You need to be flexible. You need to adapt. The hallmarks of a brand are consistency and recognizability. Your personal brand is a fascinating theme, and I will explore it also in a separate show. It's a very interesting and very deep topic. It has a lot of nuances, both positive and negative. And you probably remember, those of you who are in the digital art space, how Beeple came about to become both a brand, very recognizable brand. He sold his artwork, which is a journey of a digital artist called Everydays, for $69 million. Well, it's consistency, because every day for over a decade, he would produce a piece of art and put it on Instagram and gain a following of a lot of friends and fans. So audience is king. That's the first implication for the digital artist. It's key to what's happening in art. A great audience is more important than the creation of great art. This is the reality today. You can fight it, but I don't think it's possible to. The central fact about the audience is this emergence of a fan. A fan, as probably nobody needs to be reminded, comes from fanatics, so it's your devotee, and it's not just a simple passive viewer or listener anymore. The fans are in the driver's seat, and it's even more so for digital artists who want to venture into Web3. In business terms, a community of fans is your niche. And the very first principle of marketing, you need to have a niche. Everybody is reaching out one specific audience and one specific set of channels by delivering one specific kind of art. And this means, well, let's go to the first commandment, that everybody has to have a brand. The concept of a personal brand, the brand called you, rose in direct response to this emergence of the web. Other implications for digital artists. The audience is your niche, and you, the artist, you are the brand. You reach your audience by having a brand. Sometimes young artists come up to me and say, "Oh, have a look at the portfolio that I've got on my Instagram, and I've got this many followers." Yes, it's great, but it's only a first step. And these followers do not necessarily produce any sales, do not convert. Same if you have a portfolio on Rarible and OpenSea, Foundation and SuperRare, all these digital marketplaces. Yesterday, I had a look at OpenSea. OpenSea has got 2.3 million active wallets. Of course, some of them are curators and collectors and so on, but there are many artists there that you just get lost in this open sea of maybe sameness of content and so on. The chances of selling there, if you're a young artist, are very slim if you don't do any marketing. So you need to develop a marketing and promotion strategy, develop and nurture your collectors. And there are two ways that you can use to go about it. You can do it yourself, become a producer and sole entrepreneur yourself, or you can outsource the branding and production activity to somebody else. But maybe you should start as a young artist to being your own producer. And the bottom line is, you as an artist are a creative entrepreneur, and you need very new entrepreneurial skills. What is the top skill for a digital artist today? The same as for digital entrepreneurs, or entrepreneurs for that matter. It's selling. This may come as a shock to you, but that's very, very true. You can't be in digital art if you don't like marketing and selling. Pure art for art's sake, is just a stereotype. It doesn't serve you, and it actually inhibits your growth as an artist. So this is what I had to say for today. I hope you picked up a couple of insights from that. And thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. And I will be back on the Fringe show on Fridays at 2 p.m. Dubai time. Thank you again.